Hello and welcome back to the SaaS Marketing Weekly podcast with me, your host Ryan, the founder of Rocket SaaS, and I'm back in the studio with Jamie. Welcome back.
Again.
So my mum listens to this podcast. Hi.
I didn't actually know that.
Yeah, she's a big fan. She's learned a lot about SaaS marketing. So hello, Mum. And she said to me the other day, so I'm from the South Coast. I grew up on the South Coast. I've lived in London for about 15 years. And she said to me, Ryan, you're losing your accent. You're sounding like a Cockney. And I sort of thought, well, Mum listens in the car. And I thought maybe while she's like concentrating and reverse parking, then you start speaking. And she thinks that you're me. she
thinks we're up in that London for too long. Look.
Yes, I don't sound like Jamie. Don't sound like I'm selling illegal apples on a market.
On a market stall.
But anyway, hello, Mum. Glad you're listening. And this week, Mum, we are talking about going niche. So we're talking about getting niche and getting narrow. So lots of businesses come to us and they just are not narrow. They don't have a niche at all. And that is a big problem. Or a lot of startups come to us and they do have a niche. They do know who they're going after. They're going after this particular industry. However, with startups that don't have huge $100,000 monthly ad budgets, you need to get narrow within that niche. So let's say, for example, if you're targeting say fintech companies in the UK, that's good that you have that particular niche and your messaging can be all about fintechs, but your ad budget isn't going to stretch to target every single fintech in the UK. So you need to get really narrow within your niche for your ad budget and your just whole marketing campaigns and your messaging to be really, really effective. So we're going to talk about kind of the problems of going too broad. I'll tell you a little bit of a story about my business and Rocket SaaS and how we started broad and went niche, and then the impact that has now had it with the growth of the business. Then we're also going to talk about ad budget and just how to get niche and how to know what your niche targeting should be, and also how to get really narrow to get the most out of your ad spend. So niching for my business was the most impactful thing that I ever did. So my business is actually, I say Rocket SaaS is 5 years old because I launched the brand 5 years ago, but the company is actually 13 years old. We used to have a different name. We used to be called Red 13 Digital. And if you ask me over the sort of 13 years of my kind of entrepreneurial journey, what is the biggest impact that I ever did, the biggest decision that I made, and that was to niche. That was to niche into B2B SaaS. So for the first 8 years of the business, we were industry agnostic. We were making websites and doing marketing services for any type of industry, like recruitment firms and tech companies and pubs and restaurants and just anyone. And the business for about 8 years just kind of plateaued. It sort of did okay, did a small little bit of growth every now and then. But then I remember I did a course and we learned 10 things on that course. And the first lesson was you must niche. And I ignored that advice. And I thought, why niche? Why I can target the whole world. Why would I go narrow? That's stupid. And then, skip forward 3 years later, the business is still plateauing. And I did another course and they were like, lesson number 1, niche. I thought, right, I'm going to listen this time. I'm going to niche the business. So I changed the business to be completely niched into B2B SaaS. We leaned so heavily into that we changed the name of the company. That's where Rocket SaaS was born. We rebranded the business in a big way, and we just went all in on B2B SaaS. So we got rid of all of our clients that we were doing, pubs and restaurants and recruitment companies, etc. We just only focused on our B2B SaaS clients, and then we only targeted B2B SaaS clients. And that is when the company really took off. So it took me like 8 years to learn that lesson. I wish I learned it at the beginning. But that was the biggest uptick in growth of the company. So yeah, if you don't have a niche, I highly recommend that you pick one. Like we have a lot of clients that come to us. I can think of one, for example, came to us recently, and they do AI automations for any business. And I remember when that inquiry came in, I was like, oh, this is going to be a top one. AI automations for any business, because it was a great product. It could do it for any business, but I just thought, well, unless you're going to come to me with a £2 million a month budget, then this is not going to fly. But thankfully, when we did the kickoff meeting and we met the client, they said, oh no, we want to niche into travel. We want to do AI automations for the travel industry because we've got experience in that space. We've got thought leaders, we've got expertise, we know what the travel industry need. And all of us at RocketSaaS were like, great, phew, they've got a niche that we can go after. Brilliant. So suddenly when they told us that, we immediately knew exactly what messaging we had to create for them, who we have to target, what type of lead magnet campaigns can be built, how even the graphics on the website can look. It can all be very travel focused. And then I know that when travel prospects are coming onto their site, seeing their ads, even speaking to the sales team, they'll be thinking, these guys are experts in my business and what I do. And that will just make them such a more compelling opportunity for them to work with them. But Jamie, I know that you obviously have experience from more like a technical side and an ad budget and like spreading budget too thin. So why don't you talk to us about what's the problem with a typical startup? Let's say that a typical startup that we work with might have somewhere between £1,000 and £5,000 a month ad spend. And even if you do have, let's say, the whole travel sector as you're targeting it, it's still too broad. So talk about the problems as to why a campaign might fail or a business's marketing strategy may just not work if you don't get even narrower on that target.
Yeah. So this is probably the most common issue I see across startups who come to us, is that the business theoretically can serve lots of different types of customers, but they don't have, one, the resources internally or in general, even if they're working with an agency, for example, to go after multiple segments, because those segments all probably require individual go-to-market motions because they're different buyers with different needs, have different behaviors when they buy. It's all kind of different segments that need different approaches. And I think when you actually look at it and you kind of actually, especially if you're a marketer, you start seeing this really quickly. I think sometimes it can be harder in the business because you don't pick up on it, because you're not running campaigns, you're not writing messages for broad audiences. Some of the common things that I see, I think strategically, when you go too broad, so like you as a business have decided we're going to position ourselves for like 7 different like personas and 9 different industries, because we can theoretically, they can buy from us and all in these regions across Europe and the US and the UK and etc. We theoretically can sell into those people. One of the biggest problems is that the broader you go, the more you open yourself up to competition for a start. So if you're positioning yourself broadly across different industries, across different spaces, there are going to be other tools within those specific spaces that you start opening yourself up to compete with. And you as a startup, you're not Monday.com. You don't have like 3 million in budget to just spend to just get mass awareness and like mass market share. Like you don't have the resources. You probably have a small team or an agency you're working with. So you need to focus. So strategically, it's a bad bet because you just open yourself up to so much competition. And then there's the technical things that you kind of mentioned. So this is where, when I'm working with a client and when people in our agency are working with clients, we have to spend a lot of time kind of coaching through and sort of like showing how it all breaks down. Is you can theoretically serve, your business isn't limited. You can theoretically serve these people across different industries, across different regions, etc. One of the problems that we see is that when you actually start thinking about things like, okay, this is the budget you have, and this is the amount of resource that we have in-house, you start to see how it filters down and starts to break every kind of lever and layer that you have in your kind of campaign structure. So first of all, budget. So let's say I'm working with a client, they've got like, I don't know, like maybe £3,000 to £4,000 in budget monthly. So solid enough budget to work with. And particularly like maybe that client has a lot of like web traffic. We have a really good opportunity to retarget, stuff like that. We can get a campaign set up, but one of the things that we'll commonly run into is they'll be like, right, okay, this is the ICP. And we'll be like, that's not going to stretch that far, because when you actually start to look at that ICP in totality, you can get that sort of like, whether it's an account list or whether you're just kind of building it in LinkedIn, ends up being a huge audience of like, let's say 150,000 people or 200,000 people in LinkedIn. If you have a budget that size, you're only going to be able to afford a fraction of that audience to reach each month. And if you think about how B2B buying works, it's rarely just see ad, click ad, go to landing page, convert. That can happen, but it's not how typical B2B buying works. To really make an impact in B2B, you need to be front of mind. Like we've kind of talked about on the pod loads, like a lot of people aren't in market. So you need to be front of mind. You need to be consistently showing up in front of that person. So you need to have a niche within your ICP, people you can serve or like ideally can serve, that you can afford to reach month over month, all of them, ideally, or like a large significant portion of them, and hit them enough times that you can make an impact. If you have a £3,000 to £4,000 ad budget, like I just mentioned, and you're trying to target 200,000 people, you are not going to be literally able to afford to reach all those people enough month on month over time to make an impact. So the better play is, right, who's the best people in that we can reach that?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Right. So if there was like 1 million people within your ICP that you're trying to target, and you want to be creating a lot of content, you want to be creating things like blogs and guides and webinars and podcast clips and videos and at the bottom of the funnel stuff, talking about your features and trying to get people to book a demo. There's a lot of content you need to create to get those numerous touch points before they're ready to buy from you, ready to book a demo. So let's say you've got, I don't know, say like 10 different ads / pieces of content that you want to get in front of your ideal customer. If that base is 1 million people and you just serve these ads to those millions of people, then there's not enough of them are going to see, more than one piece of content. You might have like, if there's 1 million of them, you might get, say, sort of 50% of those people see one of your ads a week, and then another 50%.
Probably with a £4,000 budget, you'll probably get about even 10 is being generous. So even 10 is being very generous.
So basically your ICP, they're going to just see your content like occasionally, which is not enough. You're kind of spreading the pancake far too thin. So what you're much better off doing is getting a much smaller group of people and just consistently hitting them with new content all the time. So rather than having 1 million people, if you squeeze that down to say like 20,000 people with the same budget, that they're going to just be seeing all of your content. They'll be getting invited to webinars or seeing webinars via ads. They're going to be seeing the bottom of funnel, the book a demo ads,
seeing the
thought leadership stuff. Oh yeah, the case study testimonials, not even mentioned those. So you're much better off having like 20,000 people seeing your stuff every other time they come onto their LinkedIn or their Meta or wherever you're doing the ads, as opposed to spreading yourself too thin. And that's the difference. Like that's why people book demos. I always forget the number, but Google released those numbers, like the 11/7/4 rule. I always forget the numbers. It's like a brand has to see your content 11 times. Is it 11 hours in 4 different formats?
It's on the pod. It's definitely on the pod.
I can't remember. They need to consume a lot of different content in different formats before they're ready to buy from you. So, again, to use my business. So even here at Rocket SaaS, we've got a very narrow ICP. We're targeting B2B SaaS companies, predominantly in the UK, between, what's the headcount?
Around 10 to kind of 200.
Around 10 to 200 roughly. So we know exactly who we're going after. And then we've created multiple different content formats: the podcast, the email newsletter, the blogs, the guides, the videos, the webinars, the breakfast invites, the bottom of the funnel ads, great website we want to get people coming to. And we're just getting all this different types of content in front of that very narrow audience. And we know that most of them, as long as they're logging onto their LinkedIn semi-regularly, they're going to be seeing us popping up all the time. So when we have sales calls with people, they always say the same thing. They'll say, we see you guys everywhere. I've seen so much of your content. Some people like podcasts, so they listen to podcasts. Some people don't like listening to podcasts, so they like consuming the newsletter. Some people like reading blogs, some people don't. So we're hitting them with lots of different content formats, and that just means that we're showing up in front of the right people all the time, as opposed to if we were targeting B2B SaaS companies from 1 employee to 10,000 employees in America and Europe and the UK, which in theory we could serve those businesses. But if we did target all of those people, we'd just be spread too thin. Not enough people would be seeing our content consistently enough. Therefore, like the brand awareness, the brand recognition just wouldn't be there, and we just wouldn't be getting as much. Anyone
no one would know who we are.
Yeah, but you like, I think I saw an ad from Rocket SaaS like a month ago, as opposed to I'm seeing him every day.
Yeah.
So that's why you need to get really narrow. I think Jeremy said earlier, pretty much every client that we're taking on, they often come to us because they've got a relatively small ad budget. They often come to us with a wrong expectation of who they think they should be targeting with the ads. Some of them do a really good job at getting a niche, like that travel company that I mentioned earlier. That's great, but it doesn't mean that you can target every single travel company in the world, you need to keep getting narrower to decide who you're going to go after. And obviously, as the business scales and as you start to see results in that initial small pool of people that you're targeting, you start to bring in revenue, then you increase the ad budget, and then you can start to open up different pools of people. You can start to go a little bit up market. Obviously, that brings complexity around, like, is the offer correct for going up market? Does the website need to change? Is the brand premium enough? We're not going to get into that too much today, but the main message is to, even when you pick the niche, pick a small pool of that niche that you are best to target. So Jamie, why don't you try and walk us through, like, how do you pick that, like, small niche within your main niche? So let's say, for example, you are targeting travel companies in the UK. Currently that's basically any travel company. So how do you know, if you got a relatively small ad budget, how do you know who to go after?
Yeah. So that's going to go back to your customer data. So you're going to find out pretty quickly, like, what titles, first of all, are reaching out and actually booking calls with you, meetings with you, demos with you. What titles actually initiate the buying process. That's who you're going to be want to reaching with your ads if you've got limited budget and limited resources. That's absolutely essential. You're going to be able to see pretty quickly as well, there's going to be a sweet spot usually within your ICP of, like, the companies that you do absolutely best with. That just takes analysis. You need to go back through your customer data, look at where your sweet spot is, and where the trends lie, focus there. Absolutely. Like, in terms of size, in terms of headcount, in terms of region. Just when you're working with small budgets, it's prioritizing is the biggest impact thing you can do. And so finding the niche within the niche is all going to go back to looking at your customer data. And if you have no customer data and you've got no opportunity data, then you can look at things like even just like your lead data and, like, where you're having the best conversations. Like, if you've got to start somewhere, but don't go broad as a start, because you're like, oh, we don't know who to target, so we'll just go broad and see what comes in. That is disaster. That is wasted spend waiting to happen. Like, and I think the important thing as well that I want to kind of mention is, like, note for founders, basically. Like, just because you're narrowing at the beginning, it does not pigeonhole you forever. I think what SaaS brands can often do is that they can overthink, like, how much, like, niche segmenting down or niching down will impact the business in the future. Obviously, yes, there may be challenges when you get to a certain scale of, we need to broaden past our core, but that is a much better problem to have when you've grown to that extent and you've got the profits from it and you've got the more resources, you've got the ability to broaden. It's infinitely easier, in my opinion, to broaden than to narrow back. Because what you'll find as well is that if you start broad and you try and kind of hammer away at it, often that mindset gets ingrained in the organization. The sales team obviously might be working very broad sets of accounts as well, and they're used to it. So they might be pushed back about going too niche because maybe they're not getting the same contacts from other industries and stuff. It becomes an organizational change, and that is difficult. And I think that's why I would always recommend, like, if you're starting out, particularly if you're starting out with, like, ads in particular, niche down. Don't be afraid of, like, oh, we're going to be pigeonholed. What if people think we're only for this? You're not. You'll be able to broaden out eventually. There's endless companies in software, in business, in marketing in general that have started narrower and they broadened out. Like, Amazon started as a bookstore. It's not a B2B company, started as a bookstore, and look at them now, they do literally everything. So I think there's just infinite opportunity to broaden, but coming back down is harder.
Right. So, I mean, that's I'm going back to my story of my business. When I was deciding to niche, I looked at, my existing customers. So I had all these different customers in all different segments and different industries. And I thought, well, which customer, like, well, look at who pays us the most money. Who do we like working with? Like, who are we passionate about working with? What's, like, a growing sector? That's getting a lot of investment, they've got money. And I was working across, like, recruitment, pubs, restaurants, and SaaS. And SaaS just, like, stood out to me. So, you should analyze your existing customers. I think for most B2B SaaS companies should, the average kind of sort of late stage startup, kind of early stage scale up should have hundreds of customers, and you can do some CRM analysis. We talked about that before in a pod, using tools like Glay to do some HubSpot analysis to start categorizing your existing clients in terms of what industries they fall into, the company headcount, the revenue. Also looking for sweet spots, like companies that have just raised funding, for example. That can certainly kind of fuel some of the messaging that you create. So always start by analyzing your existing customers. Like the clue really should be in there, unless you're thinking about doing a massive pivot. So that should help you identify that. But you don't want to get too narrow. Like for example, Rocket SaaS on LinkedIn, using our LinkedIn ads, we're targeting about 15,000 companies at the same time. So that because you also have to remember that just because LinkedIn tells you that you're targeting 15,000 companies, and obviously you've got the individuals that work within those companies, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of them are going to be on LinkedIn every single day. A lot of them are not going to be on LinkedIn ever. So that number suddenly gets a lot smaller. So yeah, you want to really make sure that number, again, it depends on what ad budget you're spending, but at least 10,000 companies, would you say, Jamie?
Yeah, so it depends on your goals. Yeah, like I think ultimately it depends on where you are as a business and kind of what sort of volume you need to drive and kind of what's been set to you. But like ultimately, I think a good way to look at being, so you want to narrow down, you want a niche, you want to avoid being too narrow unless you have really, really really great tech that kind of gives you intent data about when people are in market, or there's signal based stuff, and you can kind of put together a really good picture of when to go after specific accounts, and you can really predict when they come in market. For the majority of startups, that's not possible. So realistically, if you're targeting like 1,000 accounts and you don't have that stuff in place, but you're like, right, these 1,000 companies, they're the people we want to go after, roughly 5% of those might be in market. So that's 50 companies in a month that you can theoretically win.
Yeah, so that's also worth mentioning. It obviously depends on your ticket value. Like if you're selling an enterprise product that's worth $100,000 a year, kind of thing, then obviously the pool can be smaller. If you're selling a product that's $50 a month, then the pool needs to be a lot bigger. I'd actually argue LinkedIn ads may not work for you if you're kind of that low ticket. Okay, so let's talk about different options of how you can get narrow. So you can get narrow in vertical or industry. There's also the job titles that you go after, also things like technology. So for example, at Rocket SaaS here, the vertical is B2B SaaS. There's obviously lots of micro niches within B2B SaaS that we're not kind of targeting that specifically yet. And we go after marketing managers and founders. For the slightly larger companies, it's marketing managers. For the smaller companies, it's the founders. Obviously, that can be called CEOs, and the marketing people could be heads of marketing, CMOs, etc. But those are our two kind of clear targets that we're going after. We could be tempted to go after CFOs and COOs and all the other ones, but we know that really our sweet spot, based on our customer data in terms of who we're having conversations with, who are filling out the forms when they're thinking of inquiring with us, it's usually those people that I just mentioned. So we know that those are the ones that we want to target. Therefore, we can create content that we know that those people care about. Like if we were going too broad and we were targeting CFOs, like we used to do this, we used to sort of target CFOs, and we should talk about how SaaS companies can raise funding. And we give SaaS companies tips on how to raise funding. And that was good content because CFOs of SaaS companies cared about raising funding, but it was too far removed from what Rocket SaaS does as a business. We don't help companies raise funding. So then we got narrow. Okay, let's only talk about how marketers can become better SaaS marketers, just create content that they love to consume, or we create content that teaches founders how to scale their SaaS business through marketing. So suddenly our messaging gets really, really narrow, that we're only speaking to the people that we know are most likely to buy from us. So yeah, anything you want to add in terms of like what types of I guess or use cases or job titles, industries, in terms of how you know how to get narrow?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think when I'm kind of working with clients and in general, like there's a few ways that we look at kind of segmenting up and kind of narrowing down typically where we start from. So the first is vertical. That's usually kind of like somewhere where we can start. I think a good way to think about this, because I think a lot of founders in particular and marketers are a bit worried about going vertical sometimes, because they're like, we're not one vertical. That's not what the business is. And it's, again, going back to what I said earlier, you're not one vertical forever. You're one vertical to get where you need to go at this current time and to make your campaigns effective. When it comes to actually going down to vertical, I think a good way to frame it is if you look at like B2B marketers. So a B2B marketer in SaaS and a B2B marketer in like professional services, working for like PwC, for example, have the same job, technically. They do very different things. They have very different focuses, and they have very different thought leaders, attitudes, technologies that they use often. Like they are actually very different buyers. So this is why I think vertical can be really powerful, is that actually when you look at someone like a persona, often in the vertical, they identify with the vertical more than they do with the persona often. So like I am a B2B SaaS marketer. That's what I do. That's what I am. I could go be a B2B marketer in other industries, but ultimately like a lot of the stuff that I do, the way that I kind of approach marketing, a lot of it's informed by this industry. So a lot of the things that I'm going to be influenced by are SaaS specific messages, content, ideas, influencers. And so vertical positioning and vertical messaging can be really, really effective. So that's one way. However, often vertical, again, going back to the challenges on LinkedIn. So sometimes if you go too small, you look at your LinkedIn audience and you're like, right, this is quite a small audience, probably not going to get us to where we need to go. There are other ways to approach it. You don't need to go vertical. It's just one option. You can also look, there's a client that we've been working with recently, brilliant business, does forecasting for SMEs, brilliant platform, brilliant product, brilliant founder. When we were kind of looking into that business, they have a broad spread of people that they currently work with. They can serve lots of different types of businesses and they're winning business from lots of different types of businesses. When we looked at it, we looked at the budget that we had available and we looked at kind of the audience size that we could theoretically reach with that budget. And when we looked and kind of broke down the audience, what we found was there were kind of 3 core verticals that had a shared use case around working capital. And that was where they're getting most traction around that use case. So breaking it down by use case and linking specific verticals or personas to that use case, again, we can still personalize to those industries because they have a shared use case that matters to them. So we might not be calling out their their industry in the ads, in the content, but we can talk about the use case very specifically. And we know we've got a relevant message for those people. So that's another way of doing it. Binding together small groups of clusters of industries around shared use cases and like jobs to be done. And then there's plenty of others as well in terms of more technographic options. So things like companies that use specific technologies. For a lot of businesses, if a company is using a specific technology, maybe like a specific CRM like HubSpot, or maybe they use like Xero or something like that, like maybe you're an excellent fit for businesses that use that software. And if it's a meaningful message for you to personalize, if you're able to go out to those people and say like, we are the best option for people using this software to do this job, again, meaningful way to personalize, meaningful way to narrow it down, brings the audience down to where you probably have a better fit. And again, it gives you another option. So you don't need to just do vertical, there's use cases, there's technographics. And there's also even when you kind of think about more like bottom of funnel plays, like if you want to start off and really just kind of try and capture the low hanging fruit, you could segment by people using competitor tools or following competitors.
Yeah.
That's just another example. But there's loads of ways to narrow initially.
Nice. And I wanted to also talk about, I think, the website and the brands, because you often get a lot of pushback from leadership. The marketer can approach leadership and say, right, we need to go narrow on this particular industry, this particular job title. And there's various different ways that you can do it. So with my business, I niched and I narrowed so hard that I changed the name of the company. I rebranded the company. I completely changed the website, the messaging, and absolutely everything. So I went super hard on it, but I appreciate that for a lot of businesses, particularly if you're the marketing manager and you want to do this, that, you can't go that hard. The leadership's not going to agree with you on that. So you then got the question of the homepage. So the homepage of the website, a lot of founders, and I'm not saying that they're wrong, a lot of founders will say, or CEOs will say, no, we can't change the homepage to be like, we're only about this industry, we're only about this this kind of job title. So therefore the homepage sometimes does have to stay broad, but you as the marketer, you can create campaigns for that a very narrow niche, and you can still do that by having an industries drop down menu in the sitemap or use case. So you've got a landing page or a series of landing pages that is going after that narrow audience that you want to go after. And obviously you can create LinkedIn ad campaigns and content all about that audience that you want to go after, as long as you're funneling people to the right landing page on the website, so that when they click on an ad, They read some content, then they come onto the website. They're coming to a landing page that is speaking your niche. So yeah, if the CEO and you kind of disagree on how narrow you want to go, you can still do your narrow play without disrupting like the rest of the brand and the homepage and everything. And then what might happen is if you have massive success in that campaign that you're running, then that might convince the business to go all in, and then to actually change the whole business to be about that niche, because you need to prove results. Obviously, like it's a pretty bold move to just totally change and rebrand the whole business about one particular vertical until you've got the results in that. You can be brave and daring and do it, but really you should get results first. So that's just something I wanted to add about how to position it to leadership. And you don't have to totally change everything in the brand and the homepage. But I think that should probably wrap it up. I think just
Go narrow.
Go narrow. So to summarize, go narrow, and then go narrow within that narrow when you've got a limited ad budget, because what that does is it just unlocks kind of everything. It allows you to create messaging that's hyper targeted to them. It even allows you to do market research, because you know exactly who you should be researching, asking questions, surveying, what do they care about, what content are they interested in. And then your content creation gets very, very targeted. You know exactly what type of content to create: the podcast episodes, the newsletters, the blogs, the guides, the videos, etc. The landing pages, how you describe your features and benefits. Suddenly everything, you just know exactly how to describe things, and how to create content that people are going to care about. And if you create good content that people care about, they are going to get into your funnel. They're going to follow you. They're going to begin to know you, like you, trust you. And what happens after that is you start to get leads coming into the business. So that's like the power of going niche.
That is actually one underrated benefit that no one ever talks about. When you go niche and you do the same content and same messaging for the same audience all the time, the marketing team gets better. They know exactly what to do. They get feedback faster. They learn faster, and they execute faster. Just putting that out there.
Yeah. It's true. Well, that's pretty much the essence of why Rocket SaaS is scaling fast, is because we know exactly who we're going after. We're creating content just like this podcast that you're listening to or watching now. And because we know that we're not, trying to target loads of different industries and sectors. We know that you're either a founder or a marketer of a relatively small B2B SaaS company. So we know to create content that you want to consume. And then therefore you know who Rocket SaaS are, you know what we do. And eventually people choose to go on and work with us because they like the content that we create.
That's how it works.
And it's not happening accidentally. We're targeting people. We're putting money into getting this content in front of the right people, and it's not costing us an absolute fortune in a marketing budget because we've got a narrow niche of who we want to go after. And that's why the business is scaling really rapidly at the moment. So there you go, niche. Hope you can take some inspiration from our story. My story of niching the business took me 8 years to learn the lesson. Finally did it, and now that business is scaling. And now with people like Jamie, we get really narrow with our ad campaigns and everything, and it's just really, really working. And you can do it yourself for your business. So thank you so much for listening to the SaaS Marketing Weekly podcast. I will see you next week.